Who was Christopher Columbus? Chapter 2. Mapping the World. In 1476, when Christopher was 25 years old, he was on a ship attacked by French warships. The ship went up in flames, but Christopher managed to reach the shore. He was near a small fishing village in Portugal. Some villagers found him and took care of him. Christopher was happy for their help. However, he did not want to stay in a quiet village. He soon made his way to the capital city of Lisbon. For 9 years, he lived in Lisbon. His brother Bartolomeo lived there too, and they opened a business together. They were map makers. This was a perfect job for a man who wanted to learn more about the world. At the docks, the brothers would meet the captains of incoming ships. They would collect information and create maps based on what the captains told them. At the map store, Christopher heard merchants talking about trying to find a new route from Europe to eastern lands known as the Indies. Why were these merchants so interested in traveling there? Spices. Spices such as pepper, ginger, cloves, and cinnamon. People use spices in cooking to flavor food. In Egypt, Italian merchants could buy spices from the Indies. Then they sold them all over Europe for a lot of money. But if an explorer found a route directly to the Indies, he could buy up spices. There would be no need to rely on the Italian merchants. Whoever found a sea route to the Indies would grow rich from the spices trade. At that time, most people knew the world was round. What they didn't know was how big it was. It was thought that one landmass, Europe and Asia and Africa, was surrounded by one body of water called the Ocean Sea. The only travelers so far to reach the Indies had gone by land. The description of the world, written by the explorer Marco Polo, told of his travels from Italy to China. Columbus read the book. He was fascinated by Marco Polo's stories of rubies as big as a man's fist and palaces with floors made of gold. Marco Polo and the Silk Road. In 1260, two brothers, Marco and Niccolo Polo, traveled east overland from Europe to China. In those days, China was part of the Mongol Empire. In 1265, they arrived in China and met the ruler Kublai Khan. Over the next 200 years, trade between India, China, and Europe grew. Merchants traveled the overland route, known as the Silk Road, and traded goods such as silk, pearls, gold, rubies, pepper, nutmeg, cloves, and tea. But the road was long and dangerous. Travelers had to cross deserts and mountains. Bandits waited to rob them of their goods. By the 15th century, Europeans desperately wanted to find another way to the Indies. Columbus was determined to be the first to sail all the way to the Indies. The King of Portugal had tried to send ships to the Indies by following a route around Africa, then east, but the ships kept turning back. The sailors said this route was too long, and they did not know where they were going. But Columbus had another idea, a better idea, he thought. He would sail west to the Indies. He would sail straight across the ocean sea. Other people laughed at his plan. Sail across the ocean sea? Why, that would take months. Columbus wouldn't be able to take along enough food and water. How would he and the crew survive? Christopher had no answer for these questions, so he read more. He read book after book about traveling the world. One book said there were only 3,000 nautical miles between the Canary Islands and Japan. Japan was a place in the Indies where Columbus wanted to go. Another book about the Indies claimed there were men with umbrella-shaped feet, people with eyes on their shoulders, and creatures that were half lion and half eagle. Most people thought these stories were made up. Still, the more Columbus read, the more excited he became. Even more important to Christopher Columbus was his belief that God meant for him to make the journey to the Indies. He believed God had given him the love of the sea, God had brought him to Portugal, and God would guide him in his travels. Chapter 3. Waiting and more waiting. What Christopher needed was someone to give him the money for his trip, someone who was rich and powerful, someone like the King of Portugal. But how would Christopher meet the king? He needed an in, a connection. In 1478, Christopher Columbus married Felipa Pestrello y Moniz. Her family had friends at the king's court. But it wasn't until 1484 that Christopher Columbus finally met King John II of Portugal. Columbus stood tall in front of the king. He told him he knew the right way to get to the Indies. He was sure of it. And Columbus promised to bring back lots and lots of gold. King John listened to this big talk, and what did the king say? He said no. Christopher Columbus was not discouraged. If the King of Portugal wouldn't support him, maybe King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain would. While Christopher was waiting to meet King John, his wife had died. So when Christopher went to Spain, he left their young son, Diego, in the care of monks at a monastery. A young boy would not survive a dangerous journey across the sea. Columbus had to wait 9 months to see Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand. Why? In those days, the Spanish royal court moved from city to city. Columbus could not afford to follow the court, so he settled in the city of Cordoba to wait. There he met a young peasant girl named Beatriz Enriquez de Harana. 2 years later, Beatriz gave birth to Columbus's second son, a boy named Ferdinand. Then, finally, on May 1st, 1486, Columbus got to meet King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. He was hopeful that the king and queen would say yes to the voyage. They would see what a good Christian Columbus was. He would spread the faith throughout the new lands. Plus, his trip would help make Spain very rich. But Spain was in the middle of a costly war. There was no money now for a long trip to the Indies. Columbus would have to wait. More waiting? Oh, no. 2 years went by. Columbus tried asking King John of Portugal for money again, but he was too busy celebrating the return of another explorer, Bartholomew Diaz. Columbus's plan to sail west still seemed foolish to King John. So it was back to Spain for Columbus. The war Ferdinand and Isabella were fighting went on for 3 more years. All that time, Columbus waited. And when he went back to see the king and queen, at last he got the answer he was waiting for. Yes! Columbus was now 41 years old. That was old to be setting out on such a hard journey. Bartholomew Diaz. Anxious to find a trade route to India, King John II of Portugal sent Bartholomew Diaz on a voyage. Diaz left Lisbon in August 1487. Despite terrible weather, he and his crew realized that it was possible to sail around the southern tip of Africa. They called it the Cape of Storms because of the terrible weather they encountered there. It was later renamed the Cape of Good Hope. Diaz returned to Portugal in 1488 a hero. Although he didn't sail all the way around the tip of Africa, Vasco da Gama did that in 1497. Diaz was credited with helping to open up a new trade route with the East. So Columbus was angry about the long years of waiting, so he made some demands. What did he want? Well, if he was successful, he wanted the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea. He wanted to rule all the lands he discovered, and he wanted to be able to keep 1/10 of any treasure he found there. Queen Isabella did not believe what she was hearing. Who was this arrogant man? She would not give in to his demands. No, Queen Isabella was through with Christopher Columbus. So what did Christopher Columbus do? He packed his bags, saddled up his mule, and went to see the King of France. Maybe he would send Columbus on the voyage. As Columbus started on his way, he heard hoofbeats behind him. It was Queen Isabella's men. She had changed her mind. She wasn't about to let the King of France get riches that could be hers. And if Columbus failed, well, then nothing would be lost. Neither Isabella nor the king would get a thing. The contract was signed. Columbus's journey was about to begin.